The story you're about to hear is entirely true. Along with photos, certain facts will be left out as the gruesome nature of this case will petrify even the most desensitized. The following content is rated M for mature, as viewers' discretion is highly advised. This video is sponsored by our channel members. If you'd like to support my content even further, consider joining my membership, where you will receive custom emojis, emblems, and bonus content just like this. Without further ado, this is the story of one of America's most sadistic serial killer.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jack Douglas with another armchair vacation in America. The Chippewa Indians called it Meskusing, or the Gathering of the Waters. Today, some people call it America's Dairyland, but no matter what name we give it, Wisconsin offers a countryside of rolling green hills, 8,000 lakes, and handsome modern cities. Its people proudly cherish the customs of their ancestors, whether they be Winnebago Indians or the Swiss who live in the village of New Glarus. This, ladies and gentlemen, is your armchair vacation and mine, away in Wisconsin.
There are shocking new details about the murder of America.
50% of Wisconsin is natural woodland, making it ideal vacation country for anyone who loves the out-of-doors.
America's most hated serial killer.
A cultural conservatory in Milwaukee's Mitchell Park.
The plot to kill a killer.
Few crimes in modern American history can compare to the dark secrets that came out of apartment 213 in this quiet Milwaukee neighborhood. In this blue barrel, still more body parts.
On May 21st, 1960, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Lionel Dhamer and Joyce Annette would conceive their first child, naming him Jeffrey. Growing up, Jeffrey wasn't paid much attention to by his parents. His father obtained a PhD in chemistry, and his studies often denied his presence most of his childhood. While his mother suffered from severe depression and had been known to have attempted suicide, the two would constantly argue. During Jeffrey's adolescent years, he was an active, vibrant, and happy child until in elementary school, where he started becoming more and more distant after undergoing surgery. In 1966, Dahmer attended Hazel Harvey Elementary School. He soon became intrigued with roadkills and often dissolved the remains in sulfuric acid. When Dahmer was 8 years old, he asked his father during dinner what would happen if a chicken bone were placed in bleach. Lionel was pleased because he believed his son had scientific curiosities and wanted to follow in his footsteps. So Lionel demonstrated how to preserve the chicken bones. But little did he know, he was teaching his son how to preserve his future victims. At the age of 14, Dahmer started drinking beer and hard liquor, even during school hours. He was seen by staff as a well-mannered and highly intelligent child, but with average grades. Upon reaching puberty, Dahmer would realize he was attracted to the same sex, but didn't let his parents know. He often fantasized about dominating a completely submissive male partner, to which his fantasies started to become urges. When Jeffrey was 16 years old, he developed a crush on a male jogger who frequently ran past his family's house. He hid in the bushes intending to attack the man, making him unconscious. Luckily, the jogger didn't go for his jog that day. In 1977, both parents would decide to get divorced, leaving Jeffrey to live with his father. In 1978, Jeffrey would turn 18. and soon after graduate from high school. 3 weeks after his graduation, Jeffrey would meet an 18-year-old boy by the name of Stephen Hicks. He picked up Stephen and invited him into his house to have a couple drinks. When they arrived, Jeffrey struck Stephen over the head with a 10-pound dumbbell where he fell unconscious. As Jeffrey gazed at the lifeless body of Stephen Hicks, he began to strangle him to death. He would masturbate with the corpse, dissect, and dismember the body in his basement the following day. Several weeks later, he dug a grave where he would bury Stephen and dissolve his body in sulfuric acid. His bones were crushed and scattered in the woodland behind his family's house. Due to Jeffrey's obsessive drinking, he became very unproductive, to which he soon dropped out of Ohio State University after only attending 1 semester. His father would give him an ultimatum: either get a job or join the army. In January 1971, Dahmer would enroll in the United States Army. However, his performance depreciated owing to his alcohol abuse once again. He was discharged in March 1981. 2 weeks after his return, Dahmer was arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct at Wisconsin State Fair Park. Towards the end of 1981, Lionel would send him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, hoping she would be more sympathetic. In 1982, Jeffrey was able to get employed as a phlebotomist, which seemed like the perfect job for him. He was laid off 10 months later and unable to obtain another job for over 2 years. On November 21st, 1987, Jeffrey would meet 24-year-old Stephen Tomey, where they both agreed to head back to Jeffrey's hotel for a few drinks. Upon awakening, Jeffrey would find Stephen laying next to him deceased with severe bruising and a broken rib. He then transported the body in a large suitcase back to his grandmother's house, where he then dismembered the corpse before disposing his remains. On January 16, 1988, Jeffrey would meet a 14-year-old male prostitute by the name of Jamie. Jeffrey would offer Jamie $50 to make a video back at his house, to which Jamie agreed. He was drugged, strangled to death, then wrapped in a blanket and preserved in a wine cellar for exactly 1 week. His flesh was later removed and dissolved in acid solution. Jamie's bones were crushed by a sledgehammer and disposed in a dump site. 2 months later, Jeffrey would meet 23-year-old Richard Guerrero, to which he also offered him $50 in exchange for nude photos. As Guerrero only had $3 to his name, he gratefully accepted. When they arrived at Jeffrey's grandmother's house, Guerrero was strangled and sexually abused before being dissolved in acid. The content was later flushed down the toilet drain. No one knew of Jeffrey's double life, no one except himself. It wasn't until 1988 where his grandmother decided to kick him out of the house due to his late nights and drinking habits. He would eventually move to an apartment located at 808 North 24th Street, Milwaukee. Among the first few hours of living on his own, Jeffrey would lure a 13-year-old boy by the name of Kisan Sintamason back to his apartment. Kisan managed to escape after being sexually assaulted and reported the attack to authorities. Jeffrey was charged with sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. He spent 1 week in jail before posting bail. He was sentenced 4 months later and received a 5-year probation along with the 1-year worker release program. On March 25th, 1989, after being kicked out of his grandmother's house and awaiting trial for his previous assault case, Jeffrey would meet a 26-year-old man by the name of Anthony Sears, an aspiring model. Jeffrey persuaded Anthony into heading back to his house where they can take professional pictures. Upon agreeing, Anthony's friend would drive the two to Jeffrey's grandmother's house, where he reminded Anthony that he had lunch with his mother the next day and to call if he needs a ride. The friend would drive off into the night, unaware of the danger he had just put Anthony in. As Jeffrey escorted Anthony into the house, he drugged, strangled, then dismembered him in that particular order. Jeffrey admitting to finding Anthony exceptionally attractive, so much so that he even took his well-preserved skull to work and admired it during his 30-minute break. On May 20th, 1990, Jeffrey would meet 33-year-old Raymond Smith, aka Ricky Beeks. He once again would lure Raymond into his apartment on the pretext of money in exchange for nude photos. Jeffrey proceeded to drug, then strangle Ricky to death, where he then had oral sex with the corpse after. He dismembered his body, putting his head in the refrigerator and his torso in acid. His bones were used as decor for the apartment. On June 14, 1990, Jeffrey would arrange plans for him and a friend from the neighborhood. 36-year-old Edward was invited back to Jeffrey's apartment for a few drinks. After luring Edward into his apartment, he spiked his drink with a very strong sedative, causing Edward to go unconscious. Jeffrey would strangle his friend to death, then use a knife to cut his flesh from his bones. Jeffrey would then dump the corpse in a 57-gallon drum filled with highly corrosive acid. His death was once again photographed by Jeffrey and added to his Polaroid collection. A few months later, Jeffrey would meet 22-year-old Ernest Miller, an aspiring dancer, in front of a bookstore. He too was lured back to the apartment on the pretext of nude photos. When the two arrived at the apartment, Jeffrey noticed he had only 2 sedatives left. He usually used 3. Still willing to pursue his objective, Jeffrey spiked the drink with 1 less sedative, causing Ernest to awaken while being bounded. Jeffrey began to panic, stabbing Ernest in the throat. He died on the floor, bleeding out. He dissolved his body in the same 57-gallon drum, but preserved his biceps and kept his skeleton in his closet. On September 24th, 1990, Jeffrey would meet a 23-year-old man by the name of David Thomas. He convinced Thomas to accompany him back at his apartment, to which he did. Jeffrey began his usual procedure, but after drugging Thomas, he came to the realization that Thomas wasn't his type. Afraid of letting him go, he strangled him to death. He dissolved his body in the same 57-gallon drum. On February 18, 1991, Jeffrey would meet another aspiring model, 18-year-old Curtis Straughter. He lured the young man back to his apartment where he strangled him with a belt. He dismembered his body and crushed his bones, scattering them in a previous garbage dump site. His death was photographed and added to Jeffrey's Polaroid collection. On April 7, 1991, Jeffrey would meet 19-year-old Errol Lindsay in front of the same bookstore he met Ernest 6 months prior. Errol was lured back to the apartment where Jeffrey had a more sinister idea. He wanted a submissive partner that lacked having a conscience. Jeffrey began drilling a hole into Errol's head and injected muriatic acid into his brain. He then had oral sex with the corpse after dismembering him. He kept his skull as a memorabilia. On May 24, 1991, Jeffrey met a 31-year-old man by the name of Anthony Hughes, who was deaf and mute. Jeffrey managed to lure Anthony back to his apartment where he drugged his victim first. While unconscious, Jeffrey tried yet again to create his so-called sex slave zombie. He began drilling a hole into Anthony's head, then introduced the muriatic acid. He died almost instantly. His corpse was left in the bedroom to rot for several days before being dismembered, then eventually dissolved in acid. His skull along with pictures was also added to Jeffrey's collection. On May 26, 1991, Jeffrey would pick up a 14-year-old boy by the name of Konarok Sinthamason. Unbeknownst to him, he was the younger brother of the boy who was molested a few years back, Kisan. He offered Konarok money in exchange for nude photos, and he agreed. After the photos, Jeffrey drilled a hole into the boy's skull and injected him with muriatic acid before leaving the apartment to grab a few beers. Upon arriving home, a neighbor would report a young boy running naked in the streets to what appeared to be badly wounded. Jeffrey convinced the police he was his 19-year-old boy lover and they were undergoing a lover's quarrel. The police returned the young boy to Jeffrey's supervision despite the injuries. Konerak was strangled almost immediately after the police had left. His body was dissolved in acid and disposed. On June 30th, 1991, Jeffrey would meet 20-year-old Matt Turner at a gay pride parade in Chicago. Upon agreeing to having his photo taken, the two would take a bus back to Milwaukee, where Jeffrey lured Matt into his apartment once again. Matt was drugged and strangled to death. Yet again, his body was dismembered and dissolved in the same 57-gallon drum as his previous victims. On July 7th, 1991, Jeffrey would meet 23-year-old Jeremy Weinberger at a bar called Carol's Speakeasy in Chicago. Jeffrey persuaded Jeremy into coming back to Milwaukee to take some pictures. When Jeremy asked his friend what he thought, the friend told Jeremy that he seemed alright. The two would take a bus heading back to Milwaukee, and when they arrived at Jeffrey's apartment, he drilled a hole into Jeremy's skull, this time injecting boiling water twice into his brain, sending Jeremy into a coma for 2 days. He was left in the house unattended. When Jeffrey returned, he found the man deceased with his eyes open. He dissolved the body in acid and placed his head in the freezer. When Jeremy's friend found out about the murder, he committed suicide, dying in front of his house. On July 12, 1991, Jeffrey would meet a 23-year-old man by the name of Oliver Lacey, a soon-to-be husband and a father to an only child. Jeffrey managed to lure the man in, where he drugged, strangled, then sodomized them. His body was dismembered and stored in a fridge next to baking soda. His heart was wrapped in plastic and preserved to be consumed later. On July 19, 1991, Jeffrey would meet a 25-year-old man named Joseph Bradhoft, a father of 3, sitting at a bus stop during a rainstorm. He offered Joseph $50 to pose for nude photos, to which he agreed. When the two arrived at Jeffrey's apartment, Joseph was drugged, then strangled to death. Jeffrey kept the corpse until his head began housing maggots. So, like the rest of his victims, he was dismembered and dissolved in the same 57-gallon drum. His head was also stored in the freezer along with his torso. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey would meet a 32-year-old man by the name of Tracy Edwards. He too were lured back to Jeffrey's apartment, but this time, Jeffrey didn't sedate Tracy. He would handcuff him, then draw a 6-inch kitchen knife, claiming he was going to kill him. Tracy insisted he wasn't going to leave, and he would help Jeffrey through his hard time. When Tracy would notice Jeffrey's guard down, he would strike Jeffrey in the face, causing him to fall to the ground. At 11:30 p.m., Tracy managed to escape the apartment, still handcuffed. It wasn't until a police on patrol would notice the man frantically running down the street, handcuffed. They initially thought Tracy had escaped from another officer. When they eventually caught up with Tracy, he told police how a crazy man tried to kill him. Leading them back to the apartment, Jeffrey would invite the 3 inside with a smile. As Jeffrey tried to explain, an officer would head into the bedroom to find the kitchen knife Tracy claimed Jeffrey tried to kill him with. Jeffrey pushed past the officer, trying to halt his investigation, to which the second officer told him to get back. When the officer would enter the bedroom, nothing seemed out of the ordinary until they saw a drawer open with many Polaroid pictures inside. There, they would find men of all different ages in different stages of decomposition and mutilation. The officers were in shock until the second officer shouted from the kitchen, "There is a head in the refrigerator." Jeffrey was tackled to the ground and put under arrest, where he stated, "For what I did, I should be dead." Tracy was glorified for the capture of Jeffrey Dahmer, but would eventually have a warrant due to sexual assault on a 14-year-old girl. The state of Wisconsin had been looking for Tracy, and they now have found him. After his release, he would file a $5 million lawsuit against the city police department for negligence in Jeffrey Dahmer's case. As restitution for the family was issued, Tracy received nothing as the state claimed he had escaped and didn't deserve it. He soon became homeless, where he migrated from shelter to shelter. On July 26, 2011, Tracy was facing a possible homicide along with 2 other people who were seen throwing a person into the river. He received 18 months in prison and had to pay the victim $2,500 for funeral costs. Jeffrey's confession would eventually take place in July 23, 1991, where he admitted to the murder of 17 young men. His trial began on January 30th, 1992, to which Lionel Dahmer and his second wife would attend the trials throughout. Even though he initially confessed, Jeffrey pleaded not guilty to all charges. He later changed his plea to virtue of insanity. The jury believed he was conscious of the acts, but still chose to commit them. The final witness, Park Dietz, explained there were ample evidence proving Jeffrey prepared these horrific acts and were far from impulsive. Jeffrey was believed to be sane and not suffering from any mental disorder during each murder. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive terms of life in prison. During his confession, Jeffrey requested to be given a copy of the Bible. He became a born-again Christian while serving his time in prison. On July 3, 1994, a fellow inmate would attempt to slash Jeffrey's throat with a razor he had hidden in a toothbrush. According to the family, Jeffrey had been long ready to die and accepted any punishment he might receive in prison. Jeffrey's mom said whenever he asked about his well-being, he would say, "It doesn't matter. I don't care if something happens to me." On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey was killed by his fellow prison inmate Christopher Scarver. While the two were left alone, Scarver had brutally beaten Jeffrey with a metal bar from the prison weight room. Jeffrey made no noise while being attacked. He was pronounced dead an hour later. In 2015, Scarver spoke to New York Post about why he killed Jeffrey. He stated he was disgusted by Jeffrey's crime and how he made other inmates uncomfortable by shaping his food into severed limbs. After Jeffrey's death, multiple people from Milwaukee would buy the evidence from the state, which was appraised at $500,000. The items were bought along with the infamous Polaroid pictures of each victim. They were all destroyed.
The spectators now included high school parties, organized to remind youngsters of the perils of going with strangers for fun or for money, and that this was no ordinary trial was emphasized by allowing the relatives of the victims to address the court and, at last, to confront Jeffrey Dahmer.
My name is Shirley Hughes, and I'm Tony Anthony Hughes' mother. I would like to say to Jeffrey Dahmer that he don't know the pain, the hurt, the loss, and the mental state that he had put our family in. 2 fingers and 1 thumb means I love you in sign language. My son was deaf.
My name is Dorothy Straughter. I'm Curtis Straughter's mother. Just a few things that I would like to say. You took my 17-year-old son away from me. I'll never get a chance to tell him that I loved him. I'd have a chance to tell him that I loved him the last time I saw him, which will be a year tomorrow. You took my mother's oldest grandchild from her, and for that I can never forgive you.
My name is Inez Thomas, and I'm the mother of David Thomas. You know, I don't understand how a person could really harm a person and to say that, well, I did this because he wasn't my type. Well, if everybody go around doing something to somebody because they're type, this would be a sad world today. And I just feel that this man should never be able to walk the face of the earth or to be able to harm anyone else again.
Good morning, Honor. My name is Donald Bradoff. For the Bradoff family, my mother gave 5 beautiful kids. He destroyed the baby of the family, and I hope you go to hell. I love this world. You guys did a wonderful job. bottom of my heart, thank to God, I've got a lot of strength. Thank you all. God bless America.
My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan. I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker!